Our first scripture is the call of Abram from Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. And we will read this together in responses. I will start. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to a land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and his nephew Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. So I bet you're thinking, what does Abram have to do with the Easter season, much less Lot of all people? Yes, your ears did not deceive you. That Lot of later Sodom fame. Well, it's quite a journey. Abram is a humble but faithful shepherd. And if you take the biblical family tree at face value, he's only the 20th generation after Adam. Noah having been the 10th, and Moses later would be the 26th. But God tells Abram to leave his home, his ancestral home, a place he has lived contentedly well into his senior years. Now, Abram's story is an amplification of one of our modern Lenten rites, and that is of sacrifice. During Passover, the Jews give up certain grains, commonly in the form of leavened bread. Catholics fast, and other Christians give up something dear to them during this period. For me, one year in my 20s, it was cheeseburgers, and that was quite a sacrifice. So think of Abram, though. I said this is amplified. Think of Abram being called to leave his ancestral home, everything he knows as a man, leaving it to a higher spiritual purpose. And when we look at that metaphysically, particularly in regards to the metaphysical meaning of Lent, we are to manifest our higher spiritual calling. What is it that we may have to leave behind? What aspects of our humanity, our human lives, have become a way of life for us, but are perhaps anchoring us to old ways and slowing our progress to the new? So Abram went to the Lord. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and he set out from Haran. Now I was delighted when I looked up the name of Haran. In Hebrew, it means parched. And in ancient Babylonian, it means road or crossroads. In each case, the name Haran is not an invitation to put down roots from my perspective, but rather a sign to keep on moving. Just as Haran was not a true home for Abram, there are likely aspects of your life that you know aren't truly your home. These things are not helping us actualize our ideal life, our higher spiritual selves, our higher ideal place in creation. For the next few minutes, I want you to imagine yourself, just put the bulletin in your hymnal aside. I want you to imagine yourself as your ideal, perfected self. Picture your Christed consciousness is at the forefront of your life, and you imagine having lived this way for quite some time. Close your eyes and now look through the eyes of this ascended self, seated in your ideal place in the world. Take that in. How does it feel to be there? And now look out upon the world. Far off in the distance is your former Haran, that parched place where you existed for so many years. What older traits, practices did you leave behind there? Our next scripture is from Psalm 121, a song of ascent. Let's start together by reading. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. As many of you know, I'm in the National Guard, and last weekend during drill, our new general addressed a room of my fellow senior leaders. He'd conducted quite a bit of observation and assessment, as they teach us in our Army leadership courses. And after 6 months, he'd come to see the exact same problems that have beleaguered me during my own 22 years with this organization. And I found myself during his speech nodding enthusiastically because he, like I, saw a lot of promise, great people doing great things. It was just entrenched organizationally, there were entrenched mindsets and habits that were preventing us from being the organization that all of our soldiers, especially the youngest, deserve to be a part of. It was a surprisingly motivational speech, especially for me, this well-seasoned command sergeant major with now almost 30 years of service behind me. The general said one especially motivating thing. He didn't mind if we failed at times. In fact, he encouraged it as long as we failed forward. Failed forward. Think about that for a moment. How many times have we failed ourselves by falling back into old habits, into old era thinking, finding ourselves on an old dead-end trail that we thought we were done with? But if we're moving forward, striving for something better, we're traversing new terrain. And sometimes we may stumble, but we're stumbling forward toward a better direction. And that's why I love the title of this psalm, A Song of Ascents. It reminds me of one of my favorite verses from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Do not tremble nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you may go. Now, both in the Psalm and in Joshua, I appreciate the notion of a protective external presence watching over us. But metaphysically, these verses remind us that divine isn't just hovering over us like a benevolent spy balloon. We are children of light, and that potential and that power is always with us wherever we may go. Yes, when we move backwards, our light is hidden as if under a bushel, darkening our pathway. But when it's at the forefront, it illuminates our way forward, our way upward. I heard a great quip not too long ago. If you find yourself walking through hell, walk like you own the place. And without overthinking it, I love this because in the face of adversity, I am resolute. I will not be swayed. And still, I lift my eyes to the mountain. What does that state of peaceful resolve and strength feel like for you? Think about it. I want you to close your eyes and conjure that internal state of being. In the face of adversity and challenge, I am resolute. I will not be swayed. And still, I lift my eyes to the mountain. And sit in this feeling for a moment. We're now in the New Testament. This is Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 5, and then again verses 13 through 17. And I will start. For the promise to Abraham and his prosperity that he should inherit the world was not made through the law, but through the righteousness of his faith. For they had become heirs by means of the law. Then faith would have been empty, and the promise made of no effect. For the law causes provocation. For where there is no law, there is no transgression. Together. Therefore, it is by faith that we will be justified by grace, so that the promise might be sure to all his prosperity, not only to him who is of the law, but also to him who is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many peoples in the presence of God, in whom you have believed, who quickens the dead and who invites those who are not yet in being, as though they were present. But returning to Genesis, God told Abram, whose name in Hebrew means exalted father, that he would now be called Abraham, meaning father of multitudes. And this is how our faithful wanderer became known to us as Father Abraham. It was at this time that he entered into that first covenant with God by having all the males in his family circumcised. But in Romans, the Apostle Paul reminds us that that act was not the beginning of Abraham's righteousness. He was already in a state of righteousness because of his faith in his divine inheritance. Now, remember how I said that Abraham's former home meant crossroad in Babylonian? Now, choosing to leave it would not be his only crucible. The journey to Canaan was harsh, and while taking refuge in Egypt for a spell, his wife Sarah was almost abducted into the Pharaoh's harem. And even in Canaan, they did not immediately flourish. It would be another 25 years, Abraham being now 100, according to the story, and Sarah 90, that she would finally give birth to their first child, Isaac. And eventually, if you remember the story, God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham, anguished, resigns to doing it. Unfortunately, it was a test. Now, as metaphysicians, we look at these stories as allegory, not just because Jesus quite taught the opposite of a machinating God. We look at them allegorically in order to find greater application to our own lives. The truth is that Father Abraham was incredibly human. He gave up on Canaan for a while and left, and he grew doubtful of God's promise of providing Sarah and him with a son. So he went off and got another woman pregnant. Now, he bore these crosses, not always elegantly, but each of them did move him closer, if not efficiently, closer to his divine potential. Thankfully, metaphysically, we know that we don't have to wait until death to attain that crown. And as Paul declares in Romans, Abraham was always worthy, no matter how error-prone or circuitous our paths may have been in the past. We were always worthy. We are always worthy. I want you to close your eyes and picture a former version of yourself where you were not handling life through your higher self, but through your human frailty. At some point where life was difficult because of that. I want you to look upon that former version of yourself through the eyes of your highest self with loving kindness, knowing that old version of yourself is worthy. Sit for a moment and extend that worthiness to that former version of yourself. Returning to our final scripture, Matthew 17, verses 1-9. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter and James and his brother John and brought them up to a high mountain alone. And Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes white like light. And there appeared to them Moses and Elijah as they were talking to him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, "My Lord, is it better for us to remain here? And if you wish, we will make 3 shelters here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And while he was speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son. I am pleased with him. Hear him." And when the disciples heard it, they threw themselves on their faces, and they were greatly frightened. And Jesus came near them and touched them and said, "Arise, do not be afraid." And they raised up their eyes, and they saw no man except Jesus alone. And as they were going down from the mountain, Jesus commanded and said to them, "Do not speak of this vision in the presence of anyone until the Son of Man arises from the dead." Turning to your bulletins, let us respond together. Awake, ye souls, awake. The hour has come at last, the morning hour when life doth break through ages overcast. Arise and seek God. you have given. Teach them and care and love combined, and make the earth as heaven. Think back a few weeks when Reverend Scott Morgan took us to the garden at Gethsemane, and where we witnessed the master teacher struggle with the events about to unfold. That event Matthew describes in this verse this morning took place well before Gethsemane. Jesus is transfigured. His face shines like the sun, his clothes white like light. But what does Jesus say to the disciples? Tell no one. Jesus has actualized his divine potential, but he knows now is not the time. He's not ready for the unthinkable and difficult road ahead. His initial struggles later at Gethsemane bear this out. His Father, he says, take this cup from me. But the power of Jesus' true self is undeniable. And armed with this, in Gethsemane, he is eventually able to move past that final crossroad and fulfill his destiny with a peaceful mind and a peaceful heart.